In this video, you'll see the moment where Japan is thrown into mourning after a plane crash. You'll also see two planes collide mid-air, and lastly, a disaster that resulted in a loss worth millions of dollars. Number 10. Aloha Airlines Flight 243, 1989. As Aloha Airlines Flight 243 headed for Honolulu, the weather was calm and friendly. The captain was experienced as he had 700 flight hours in the Boeing 737. The officer had flown over 3,500 miles in the same plane. Model officers conducted the regular pre-flight inspection and announced that the plane was ready to fly. It left the town with 95 people on board. When the plane got to the usual cruising altitude of 24,000 feet, the unexpected happened. People in the cockpit heard a whooshing sound followed by a crack and a deafening sound. Seconds later, the roof on the left side tore open and led to the decompression of the plane. The worst thing that happened was that the decompression caused a huge section of the roof to tear off, exposing the passengers to death. The length of the missing part measured 18 feet long. The officers noticed great pieces of debris flying around in the cockpit, only for the captain to turn and see that the cockpit doors had disappeared. Luckily, all the passengers were seated and their seatbelts on. Unfortunately, the three flight attendants who were standing were swept out through the opening in the plane. Number 9. Airport Disaster 1977. The Tenerife airport disaster is one of the worst in history of aviation. It happened due to a series of unfortunate events that began with an explosion at Gran Canaria Airport in Spain. This caused a lot of flights to be diverted from Tenerife Airport, including the ill-fated COM Flight 4805 and Pan Am Flight 1736, due to dense fog, miscommunication, and absence of ground radar. The two Boeing 747s collided with each other on the ground and killed all 583 passengers on board. However, only 61 passengers from the Pan Am flight made it out alive. When aviation experts predicted that there may be a fatal collision between the two jumbo jets, they suspected that it would happen in Los Angeles, New York, or London. They never envisioned such a massive disaster could occur in a tiny single runway airport. As of 1975, 2 million tourists visited the Canaries yearly, making the destination a major travel hub. This incident caused fears in the hearts of intending tourists. Number 8. Japan Airlines Flight 123, 1985. The crash of the Japan Airlines 123 remains one of the worst air accidents involving a single aircraft. The plane was carrying 524 passengers, including crew, when it crashed into mountainous terrain at Mount, located northwest of Tokyo. The flight left Japan's capital and was en route to Osaka when the awful event happened. Just 12 minutes into the ride, the aircraft suffered explosive decompression. This caused the loss of the rudder and hydraulic systems, thereby crippling the pilot's control over the plane. Despite the odds, the crew managed to keep the plane in the air for another 30 minutes. Unfortunately, their efforts failed because the aircraft crashed into a ridge and killed 520 passengers on board. Only 4 people survived the accident. The accident occurred at a time when millions of people in Japan returned to their ancestral homes to celebrate the holiday of Obon. The flight involved in this incident had been nearly fatal 1 year before. After it was taken for extensive repairs, it resumed operations again. Number 7. Charki Dadri Mid-Air Collision 1996. Charki Dadri is a small village in India that became famous after this plane accident. It once played host to a mid-air collision between Kazakhstan Airlines and Saudi Arabia Airlines Flight 763. It remains one of the worst disasters in plane accident history. The collision occurred after Saudi Arabia's flight took off from New Delhi, while the other was preparing for its arrival. Due to poor English language skills at the Gandhi International Airport, the flight paths crossed, and the pilots couldn't avert the collision. All 349 passengers on board died in the disaster. What complicated the issue further was that the plane was traveling more than 300 miles per hour at a force that was 700 times stronger than a car crash. People who watched from the ground saw a tremendous firewall in the sky, and from the radar, it was as though the two aircraft became one and suddenly disappeared. Debris ranging over 6 miles wide scattered around the village. Even though there were about 4 survivors, they died shortly after the plane hit the ground. Number 6. Turkish Airlines Flight 981, 1974. The Turkish Airlines Flight 981 crashed outside Paris due to the failure of the Moroccan baggage handlers to read and understand the instructions written in English and Turkish language. Another cause of the accident was a design flaw. These mistakes caused rapid decompression and caused the pilots to lose control of the aircraft. The plane crashed into the urban oval forest outside Paris, thereby killing all 346 souls. On board, the aircraft crashed at a speed of 783 kilometers per hour, thereby splitting it into thousands of pieces. This made the identification of the victims challenging. Investigations revealed that the ground engineers did not ensure that the door was locked before takeoff. The rear cargo door wasn't moved in the correct position, and the locking pins were not in place. This made the bolts give way easily, and the door swing open. Number 5. American Airlines Flight 191, 1979. American Airlines Flight 191 crash remains one of the worst airline accidents in the United States. It also brings tribute to Donald Douglas' D-10 disaster, struck only minutes after the flight took off when one of the engines on the left wing separated from the aircraft and flipped over the top of the wing. This caused severe damage and resulted in severing the hydraulic fluid lines. The flight went into a roll and turned over several times. Investigations show that the disaster was caused by faulty maintenance procedures. The accident killed 273 passengers on board and 2 on the ground. More than 40 years after the crash, it remains one of the deadliest passenger airline accidents on U.S. soil. The damage helped the government reform the aviation industry with training and improvements in technology. Accidents like this have been averted. Number 4. Air India Flight 855, 1978. On New Year's Day in 1978, Indian Flight 855 left Dubai from Santa Cruz Airport in Mumbai. The 747 used for the trip was the first of its kind. Unfortunately, the flight didn't go too far before crashing into the Arabian Sea off the coast of Mumbai. A few minutes after takeoff, the disaster occurred after an equipment malfunction and the failure of the crew to respond to it appropriately. Due to the negligence, all 213 people on board perished in what was widely described as the second worst aviation accident in Indian territory. Reports say that the captain was irrational in some of his decisions, and the crew failed to gain control as the aircraft rolled 40 degrees to the left. The pilot argued whether to do this or that in no time it was too late to rectify the damage. Number 3. Air India Express Flight 812, 2010. The Air India Express Flight 812 is one of the worst aviation disasters to recur in India. The plane was headed to Mangalore from Dubai. The airport was one on 3 airports with tabletop runways, meaning that its length is limited because of the hilly terrain. Where still there is a sudden gorge on the road. In this plane's case, the aircraft pilot miscalculated the landing and landed beyond the expected touchdown point. This was one of many other errors he made. Due to several mistakes, the aircraft rolled past the runway and fell off the cliff, causing it to split and catch on fire. Around 158 people died in the accident, and there were 8 survivors. The flight crash occurred at the Mangalore International Airport. The rule here is that the airfields prohibit supervised takeoffs and landings. This meant that only captains can pilot an aircraft during landing and takeoff. The final conversation between the air traffic controller and the pilot before landing showed no sign of distress. The weather condition was normal, and a drizzle started only a few minutes after the accident. Number 2. American Airlines Flight 587-2001. The U.S. had recorded a couple of aircraft disasters, but the American Airlines Flight 587 is the second worst aviation disaster in the country. It routinely flew between Santo Domingo, New York City, John F. Kennedy International Airport, Los Americas International Airport, and the Dominican Republic just a few months after infamous 9/11 attacks. The flight crashed soon after takeoff. A rising suspicion that it was a terrorist attack investigations revealed that the disaster was caused by pilot error. The rudder was overused as a response to waking up the turbulence generated by the plane that departed shortly before ease. A result of the overuse, the vertical stabilizer detached from the aircraft and the engine separated before falling to the ground. The plane crashed in a neighborhood in Queens, New York, and killed 5 people on the ground and 260 people in the neighborhood. Number 1. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370-2014. The disappearance of the Malaysian Airlines Flight MA 370 caused a roar and made headlines of virtually all news houses when the plane suddenly went MIA on March 8, 2014. It got everyone wondering what may have gone wrong. The flight was traveling to Beijing from Kuala Lumpur when air traffic control lost all contact without a warning or indication of any problems. Despite intensive searches conducted by various countries across the southern Indian Ocean, there was no trace of the aircraft. It was only until the flap ring appeared on a Union Island 3,700 kilometers from the search site that rescuers got a clue about the sudden disappearance. Search operations were the most thorough and expensive ever recorded. Experts say the flight changed the course for unknown reasons and continued flying despite running out of fuel. All 239 people were said to have died from the accident. Search operations were the most expensive and extensive ever, with more than $500,000 having been spent on the effort within a few months. Until next time, adios. Thanks for watching FactoPia.